I think the tussle, the kind of Cain and Abel breakup between William and Harry, stems from the fact that Harry felt that he was very supportive of William when he was undergoing his long courtship of Catherine. And remember, Catherine and her family came in for some flack from inside the royal family. That there was never any sense that Catherine was the one. She was always seen as a girlfriend or a friend from university who would fade into the background, and everybody inside the palace was blindsided when she became a real item of William's. And Harry felt that he'd supported William, and he didn't feel that he was getting the same kind of support from his brother during his courtship with Meghan. I think that there was relief inside the royal family that Meghan and Harry had decided to go abroad and relinquish their royal duties. Institutionally, it was a grievous blow because they were undoubtedly popular and they were relevant to all minorities in the Commonwealth and in Britain. What I find the most interesting story that I've uncovered for the book is the parallels between Meghan and Diana in the early days of their royal career. Meghan was called pretty early on Duchess Difficult. She was blamed for everything that went wrong, from the apparent row with the Queen over the tiaras to the bust-up with Kate. And I found it fascinating that at a time when Meghan was struggling to cope with the royal world, with protocol and so on, in her own generation before, Diana herself, she had been described as a fiend and a monster by various gossip writers and someone who sacked members of staff. And she as well was struggling to cope with depression and all kinds of illnesses. And there's a fascinating parallel there. As I say in the book, there's not a decision, not a day goes by without Harry talking about what would Diana have thought about this. And she's very much the third wheel in their marriage. He talked about it on their engagement, how she'd be thrilled, jumping up and down. He presented Meghan with jewellery that used to be Diana's. Even on their wedding night, the firework display reminded Harry of his days going to Disneyland in Florida with his mother, and the thrill of seeing the fireworks at the end of the evening then. So from the small things to the big things, Diana has always been there. And would she have approved of Meghan and Harry going to California? Well, she was at the later stage of her royal career. She was thinking of going to America as well. She found it a place of openness and opportunity. And so she would probably have a guest room at their palace in Montecito.
Well, the updated version of Andrew Morton's book, Meghan, a Hollywood Princess, is out now. Well, let's bring in my panel for the week. Joining me is Kate Mancy, assistant editor of The Mail on Sunday. Welcome. And of course, Richard Eden, the diary editor of the Daily Mail. Welcome both. Richard, let's start with you. Andrew's suggestion in this book is that the royals will ultimately be quite relieved that Megxit happened because it allows them now to get on with succession planning. What do you make of that?
I mean, who knows what history will tell, but I suspect he's right that, I mean, imagine how bad it could have been if it had happened even later. I mean, their quitting royal duties was bad enough, but, they were destined to have a key role with Prince Charles. It was going to be this slimmed down monarchy with William, Catherine, Charles, Camilla, and Harry and Meghan. And imagine if this had happened years later when that was already in place, that sort of model. It would have caused even more chaos and even more damage to the monarchy than it did now. So I think Andrew Morton might be right on that point.
So they've saved themselves a bit of admin then, perhaps. Yeah. Kate, he also points out that the roles of the royal spares, be they Princess Margaret or Prince Andrew, are rarely easy roles. Would you agree with that?
Well, yes, I think that's true, isn't it? History's told us about the heir and the spare. And in most families, children are brought up and the parents tell them that they're equally important. But obviously that's not the case when you've got one brother who's going to become the king, one brother who's not. And we saw that so clearly, didn't we, with Harry's interview when he was in South Africa. And he said, we're on different paths when he spoke about his brother. And it's so true. William was always going to be king. And then how do you grow up in a family like that? It's absolutely fascinating, really. I mean, Diana always made such a play and always said, well, they will look after the heir, meaning William, and I'll make sure I look after the spare. But obviously, you know, sadly, she wasn't there to kind of guide them through those adult years.
Do you think this is something that Charlotte and Louis will face when they grow up?
Well, I think if there's a blueprint that Harry can lay down successfully, this might be great for them when they grow up. But I think what you've got is a really stable family with the Cambridges. So they're going to grow up, you're going to have Charlotte and Louis probably really supporting their older brother with that role, really helping out and pulling together. But they just didn't have that stability. I mean, William and Harry obviously had a really close bond, but perhaps not as close as people expect. And obviously now there's this huge rift. And, you know, Morton calls it the Cain and Abel story. I mean, it's dramatic stuff, isn't it, as we've seen?
It is. And one of the stories that's covered in the book is the famous line of succession photograph that apparently upset the Sussexes. Do you think, Richard, that Harry's position in the royal family dawned on him perhaps a bit later than people might have thought?
I mean, who would have thought that such a lovely photograph could cause such anguish? I mean, that was the photograph, I think, taken in Buckingham Palace. It was a formal picture, but it was a lovely picture, and it was of the Queen, Prince Charles, Prince William and Prince George. So it was just emphasising that continuity and that line of succession. I mean, obviously Harry's known that all his life, but for me, what changed was Meghan, because, you know, instead of having, you know, a relationship where he understood what the role was destined to be for his brother, I think you then had someone there who was playing on his insecurities and who was making things worse. Instead of saying, look, don't get, you know, bothered about playing second fiddle, he had someone who was kind of nurturing that wound almost, and I think that's been part of the problem.
Kate, we can't not discuss Diana here, obviously mentioned a lot. Andrew calls her the third wheel in the marriage of Harry and Meghan. Do you think that's fair?
Well, as we'd expect from Andrew Morton, obviously, who famously wrote the Diana biography, he's always going to be tying Diana into things. But I do think it probably is fair. I mean, every time we've seen Meghan and Harry launch something, there's always been a very overt reference to his mother, and it seems to be guiding a lot of what they do. And very much kind of the shadow of Diana looms large over their marriage.
But things like, you know, giving Meghan jewellery. I mean, surely any son would do that with his mother's jewellery, especially given the circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to Morton saying, well, obviously this is a sign because the jewellery was passed down, that's pretty normal for any family, I'd say. But for the fact that she seems to, her memory, it seems to guide everything that he does, and it's something that he hasn't kind of worked through. Even when they launched Archwell, there was a picture of his mother that he used when he launched his new foundation. And it's interesting to know, you know, how that will play out with regards to William, because he's always seeing this reference to his mother, which must be quite uncomfortable for him as well, that here are these memories being brought up by his brother on the other side of the Atlantic. It's a very strange dynamic.